Today I'm sharing with you how I go from the ends of one season in my raised garden beds to the beginning of the new season and ready to plant out in just a few steps. Let's go. Hey guys, welcome back to Mini Urban Farm, a channel about gardening and homesteading in the suburbs. My name is Veronica, and on this channel I teach people how to garden and homestead in a small space, in suburbia, all of that. So if that sounds like you, don't forget to subscribe. Today I'm showing you how I take my end of season garden beds, alright, everything's still in them, ready to harvest, everything just end of the season dying out, to go from that to ready to plant again in the beginning of the next season. Now, a few things to consider before we jump into it. Number one, I am in zone 9B, which means that my growing seasons here, they do run into each other, all right? So my fall gardening runs into my spring gardening. I have a short off season in the summer, and then I go into fall gardening again. Now, a lot of that does run into each other, depending on how, I'm planting out and how many things I'm growing for the season, but this applies no matter where you are, right? So if you're in zone 4 or in zone 10, it doesn't matter, because you're still wanting to flip your garden beds and you still want to make sure that they have all of the nutrients that they need to get them ready for the next planting season. With that being said, let's go ahead and I will show you exactly how I do it. Alright, so the first thing that you want to do is to harvest everything, alright? This includes all of your root crops, any tomatoes, anything on a vine, whatever it is that you do not want growing throughout the rest of the season or upcoming seasons. You're going to harvest all of the fruits, all the vegetables, all of that, and rip out anything that is an annual that you don't want to continue growing. Now, normally I do this on a regular basis whenever I see things ready, but at the end of the season, it's really important to do this as well so that you don't get any volunteers the next season. Now, if you don't mind volunteers and you have tons of space, then by all means. Sometimes I do leave some volunteers just in case, I can have some extra things creeping in, but on a whole, I just like to make sure that everything is cleaned up and ready to go for the next season. And the same thing applies to getting rid of anything that does not belong in your garden beds. Like you can see here, these little T-post things that I use to stake up my Roma tomatoes and some other plants. I get them out. Sometimes I leave them in there at the end of the season just because I have nowhere really else to put them. But I also go ahead and do some weeding. Anything that has fallen into the garden beds, like some of my little tomato twisty tie things that I use to prop them up on the trellis. Any weeds that have creeped up in between the time I harvested and the time I'm getting ready to plant, whatever it is that does not belong in these garden beds just needs to go. So this is step 2. Make sure that your garden beds are free of all debris and clutter and anything that does not belong in them. Alright, so before we go into the next step, the one thing I did want to tell you is that if you are serious about gardening, I have an entire free resource library just for gardening that you can have access to. Alright, I will leave the link in the description below on this video, but basically it's an entire resource library of things that can help you become a better gardener. Budgets, trackers, all of the stuff for seed starting, resources, everything that I use in my garden. I have an entire list on it, and you can have access to that for free. Don't forget to check that out in the description below. Okay, so next is amending your soil. Bone and blood meal is what I usually use, although you have to use it very carefully. You don't want to over fertilize, so you can see I'm spreading just a little bit over the rest of the soil. This is before I put any compost or anything in place. I have in the past over fertilized, which actually ends up killing your plants, so definitely don't do that. You can also use worm castings if you have them. I just did not have any on hand. They are still in production. The worms are working on it. After that, I go ahead and top dress with compost. You can see I'm using cow manure from the garden center. My favorite type of compost to use is homemade compost, so I will definitely use that if I have it, and that is usually what I do. However, it is still not done because I took out the majority of it for last season, and I have not been very diligent at adding back into my compost bin with all of the other projects I've had. So I went and got cow manure from the gardening center, and then went ahead and top dressed everything. I didn't mix it in. I'm just top dressing my plants. And then of course I come and take all my drip lines and put them back into place. The final actual place that they will live will depend on what plants go where, but right now I'm just wanting to soak the soil and just get it nice and moist, let the fertilizer start soaking in, the compost start soaking in, all of that. So just turning on my drip lines to make sure that they are soaking the soil and getting it nice and wet. After that, the last thing I always do prior to the beginning of the season is to mix my own seed starting soil. Now, if you have some already, then you don't need to do this step, but I always like to make my own because I find that it's actually much cheaper and I know exactly what's going into the soil. The recipe that I use for my seed starting mix is 1 part cow manure to 1 part peat moss or some sort of coco coir, and then top it off with some perlite. Now, I use this mix because it gives me the best germination rates. In the past, I've had some issues with seed starting. When I first started my own seeds, my seeds were not germinating, and if they did germinate, they were taking a very, very long time. So what I learned is that you actually have to give your seeds the best quality seed starting soil that you can. It has to be light and fluffy, and that will allow you to get the best, fastest germination rates and times. And if you want to watch me make my entire seed starting soil from start to finish with detailed instructions, I will leave that video in the description below, so go ahead and check that out also. Alright guys, so that is everything that I do to get my garden beds ready for the next season. I have been doing this for several years already, and every season I refine it a little bit more just to make sure that my plants and my direct sown seeds and my transplants are getting the best chance that they can at growing the most amount of food every season. Alright, if you want to check out exactly how I grow tons of food in a small little space, I will leave that video here on the screen somewhere, so don't forget to check that one out, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!